Welcome back to the Buddy Ruski Show. This is episode 12, the first episode of 2020, and wow, what a 2020 it has been. Jeez. Like some of you, I have a lot more free time on my hands than I expected to have 2 months ago, but I am grateful to be home safe and mostly sane during quarantine, and I hope you are too. So much has already been said about the impact of COVID-19 on our society, so I won't spend too much time talking about it here because I will undoubtedly be writing about it more than once in the near future on my website. But I think what we need most in this moment are ways to connect to each other and not let the threads of our community unravel. My goal with this show, as it has always been, is to create connections and tell stories. With that in mind, let me know who you want to hear from during this time. My email is justin@buddyruski.com, or you can find me on social media @buddyruski. My guest today is David Delaney Mayer. David is a longtime friend from my days in the legendary Watts-Hillendale neighborhood here in Durham. He comes from an accomplished family of basketball players, including both his parents, his twin brother Michael, and his older brother Paul. After graduating from Duke University, David now works as a documentary filmmaker. We chat about life in Durham, hoops culture, and what people are missing when it comes to documentaries. As always, thanks to Jeremy Rist, aka Funkleberry, for bringing us in and taking us out each show. Special music provided by DRS. Check out their new release on Roundhouse. Shout out to Roundhouse. This episode also marks the first show recorded over Zoom. You may notice a couple minor glitches, but overall I'm really happy with how the show turned out, and I hope you enjoy it as well. Without further delay, let's tip off with David. Today, my guest on the Buddy Ruski Show is David Mayer, longtime friend of mine, athlete, filmmaker, writer. He's got a book coming out that we'll talk about later, maybe. How have you been?
Good, man. I've been good. I guess like everybody, I've been navigating this strange time in the world. I've been holed up on the eastern shore of Maryland with family, so enjoying rural life.
Able to social distance pretty easily out in the boonies.
Definitely.
Well, David and I grew up in Durham together. David is a Durham native. We went to high school at Riverside together, played a little ball here and there. David is probably still the best basketball player that I've ever had the pleasure of playing with and against. What was growing up in Durham like for you? We were both in the Watts-Hillendale neighborhood in Durham, which I always talk very fondly about as very informative years for me. Met a lot of my really good friends in that neighborhood and just felt very protected and, insulated in the world in a way that was very comforting, especially coming from the neighborhood that I came from before that. But what was that experience like for you growing up in Durham and specifically in Watts-Hillendale?
Yeah, it's a hard question to answer. One of the things that I think is the older I get and the more I go out into the world and experience other people and other places, the more I realize how many different communities that I was a part of growing up in Durham. Like, my elementary school was Burton Geo World, which is, adjacent to McDougal Terrace. And then I went to Immaculata for middle school, Immaculata Catholic School, where my mom was principal. And then went to Riverside High School, which is like the greatest school on the planet, public school, which is worth pointing out in Durham, public school. And so I just always felt like I had a foot in all these different communities, and Durham itself is a very interesting place because it's diverse in kind of many different ways. I mean, both racially, but also you have like the South and you have a highly academic culture as well. Not that the South is not highly academic, but what you think about when you say the South. And so I don't know. I feel like I got a lot of different experiences from Durham itself that inform a lot of what I do now. But then specifically about Watts Hospital, Hillendale, yeah, it was a pretty amazing time. I also think our age group was like, we just sort of got lucky in that there were tons of people our age who
Mostly boys.
mostly boys. I'm sure there were girls, but we didn't hang out with them.
No.
And yeah, and we all just kind of had each other, and we didn't have to leave to find a kind of pretty incredible group of people. So yeah, it definitely a very interesting place.
I mean, to that point, there were, older brothers, you had an older brother. A lot of folks had older brothers that were 3-4 years above us. And then, I was a '08 graduate at Riverside. And then there was the sort of like group that between you and Joey Page and Zach Goldberg and Matt Brondoli and Seth Rose, that were like the sort of other end of that group. And then there were all these people in between. And so
we called ourselves the Little Brothers Club because we were always like the young side of the crowd,
right.
So.
And that had a lot of benefits, to your point about, we never had to go anywhere for basketball. It's like we always had numbers for basketball. We always had numbers for video games, playing Halo. We could play 8-on-8 Halo with the system link and never had to bring anybody else outside of the group. And then as we got older, it also informed our ability to, everybody's personality, while we had these very common characteristics, also, started to branch out and evolve and became our own individuals. And that helped all of us learn different ways of like maneuvering through life. We had people exploring music and rapping, and we had athletes that had ambitions of, going to college and playing sports. And we had academics who were working their tail off to become valedictorians of their class and everything in between. And so it was, just really interesting, to your point, like all the generations are kind of crammed into this one era that, to my knowledge, hasn't been replicated in that neighborhood or really anywhere in Durham. So it's a pretty special time. And I feel very grateful to have been a part of it. And I'm sure you do too.
Yeah, definitely. And to your point, I think it's just so cool to be in a community that just kind of was figuring stuff out. Like it was a lot of people who were a part of that. And so to your point, like there were just tons of different things that people were doing, that they were trying, that they were coming up with. And so, to your point, like there was just a lot of exposure kind of in a safe space where we're not going to get into too much trouble. But there was a lot of exposure to just different ways of doing things. So, I don't know. I'd be curious to like get some, like 17-year-old, like talk to like 17-year-olds in that neighborhood now. Like I wonder like what they're doing, but they're definitely not as sweet as we were.
And to not have any major, I mean, we definitely got into some shenanigans for sure, but to not have any major incidents with that many young men in the same proximity, I think was pretty remarkable, and had a lot to do with the parenting, all the parents taking on not just their own kids, but really taking on the neighborhood. And at any given moment, the Hoovers would have, their family's big enough as it is with all the kids that they've adopted over the years, and they still would have 4 or 5 extra kids at their house at any given time. And I'm sure your house was similar with, 2 siblings and all your other friends, and having a basketball hoop, which was like a huge magnet for any of the houses. If you had a hoop, then like you were asking for just kids being at your house all the time. So there was something to be said, or there is something to be said about the guidance and the parenting that took place in the neighborhood across the board, and for that to really give us a sanctuary of sorts to kind of, screw up from time to time and it not wreck our lives.
I think definitely. And I think like in a lot of cases, parents would generally just pretty open to letting whoever come and go. And like, I think what for me, like being on the sort of younger side of all of that, one of the, like from my perspective, what it allowed for was our own kind of hierarchies to form. And so I think it was like definitely for me, very cool to just feel very much a part of a group that I kind of looked up to, and I learned a lot of like very practical things for for a young person to learn. And like yeah, to your point, like I think we as a community, we kind of allowed for that to happen. And so I think I've always had, as a result of that, and I think also other things that I've experienced in my life, but I've always kind of tried to see myself in a bigger community, because you just realize how beneficial it is to share experiences and to feel connected to groups of people that are like a part of your daily life, and I think like we were very lucky in that. I think I took it for granted quite a lot, to be honest. I mean, not in like a bad way, but you don't know. I thought the rest of the world had that, but I realized talking to people, you don't always get that. And so yeah, very special time and place.
You talked a little bit about some of the other communities that you were a part of as a kid. How did that sort of play out, and how did those other experiences inform the way that you continued to grow?
Yeah, I think I'm still trying to figure all that out. So I don't know is the short answer. One thing that continues to strike me today about Durham and kind of the life that I've chosen is I find myself connecting to people quite often that would very much disagree with one another. But then for whatever reason, I find myself in the position of I agree with both of you. Like it's like confusing. So like, and I think a lot of that does have to do with just the way the communities I was brought up in. So like one example, like I think one of the more transformative experiences was just going to elementary school at Burton, in McDougal Terrace. Well, it's right next to McDougal Terrace.
And how did you end up that's a magnet school, Burton? Is that right?
Yeah, I don't know what it is. Burton
Okay.
Geo World. Yeah, I think it's a magnet school.
And
I
how
don't
did you
really
end up
understand
there? Because
what
that's
magnet
that's
schools
on
are.
the other side of town
Yeah,
compared to where we
I
lived.
yeah, it is. It's actually a fascinating drive to make every day, because it's like a lesson in uh, neighborhood inequality, just to make that drive, because you kind of go from our neighborhood, which is kind of on one end of the spectrum in terms of like, you know, just wealthy middle class, going east, the houses get slightly smaller, and then you get to the other side of downtown and they're even smaller, and then the racial like makeup starts to change, and you so like in a way like that drive is very poignant in and of itself. But I think we ended up there because my I to be honest, I'm not sure. My parents liked the teachers there. I think my mom is obviously like the teacher herself, and an incredibly successful academic in education in the later part of her career. And but she knew some teachers there, so, that I think she really liked. And I think it was just a really good school at the time. So my mom was like, I think it's cool. I also think for my parents, it was super important to have us go to schools that were a part of the greater Durham community, and not just sort of in like like an echo chamber of a private school or like a charter type thing. So yeah, so I ended up at Burton, and I went there for 5 years. And
Did Paul go there as well?
yeah,
Your older brother?
Paul went there. I think, yeah, he definitely went there. And then he went to Shepherd for middle school, just over there, just down the road. So yeah, and obviously very different kind of people. The people who went there were very different than people in our neighborhood,
Mhm.
and a lot of kids from the terrace, and like some of my closest friends there are now in prison. So like Quadell, that's my dude, and I don't know what happened, but he's now in prison. And so like I think I had a window into an experience that's very, very different than my experience growing up in Durham, and that's always stuck with me. And I think it, it it I as I said, I don't know how it's affecting me today. I think I realized early on that we all exist inside of a community, and it takes a lot of effort to step outside of that. And no one's right. None of us have any idea what's going on, because even though Durham is a very progressive place on the surface, it has the same damn problems that any other place has. So I think I experienced kind of intimately that what people say and what happens are often very different. So I think, yeah, I don't know. I think it informs my making documentaries today, but I'm not quite sure how yet. That makes sense.
Totally. And I think you're right about I mean, that's something, one of the gifts of being an artist and being a storyteller is exposing some of those hypocrisies and some of the shining a light on the darker side of communities that we are maybe not hiding, but are not telling the whole truth about. And Durham certainly has that. I think you're totally right about it being a progressive, well-intentioned place, but it still has plenty of racial inequality, of, and all the things that come with that, housing inequality, job inequality, and so on. So going to a place like Burton, McDougal Terrace in recent years has been kind of a, shining example of all the things that we just talked about with the problems that they've had with their housing and having to live in hotels and all the stuff that's going on there. So how much so as you're moving through school, you're starting to obviously play basketball more seriously, and that's another community that you've been a part of for a long time. Was that also a place where you got a lens into different ways that kids were growing up in Durham?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, again, like just on the surface, just racially, I mean, just, to talk about race, basketball was predominantly black and our neighborhood was sort of more predominantly white. So again, I think just playing basketball meant I was around people that I wasn't around with when I was home. So I think that became very important to me. But also I think just playing a sport really hard with teammates, kind of like like at Riverside, I mean, Riverside's just an incredible place. It's both, I mean, it has kind of everything that Durham has, it's got people from all kinds of different experiences, all kinds of different backgrounds. And we're all kind of crammed into a public school that had great teachers, still does, I'm sure. And just kind of a general positive culture that I think was, like I said earlier, like I think it's just unique in a way. I mean, I'm sure there are other places in the world like that, but I still feel very lucky that I was a part of a community that was so like really truly diverse, like in all the senses of the word. And then to play basketball there was just totally cool because you've got this group that's just like your boys that I would do anything for, and still today I would do anything for them. I mean, like they're forever, a brother of mine. And we tell each other that, and like, I think there's just something magical about having gone through that in front of and as a part of such a interesting sort of diverse community that, I think definitely very much impacts me today.
Did you ever feel out of place as a white guy playing in a predominantly black sport?
No, actually, this is kind of funny. I never did. No, never, because the second you pick up basketball, you're around black people. So in Durham, I mean, I'm sure that's not true other places. In fact, I found this out because I kind of got used to being like the white guy on the floor. It was just kind of like there's certain expectations that come with that. But I think the first time I really noticed that I was the only white guy on the floor when I played was when I was getting recruited and I was brought to a recruiting camp in Massachusetts. Like we flew up, and there were these D3 schools, and it was like a D3 recruiting camp where a bunch of the NESCAC leagues, which is sort of like Massachusetts, New York, up there. There's a lot of D3, and we had this basketball camp, and it was all white. And Michael and I were like, "What the hell is going on?" First of all, we didn't realize that like white people played basketball that much. I mean, we knew like kind of, but I didn't know there were that many white people who play basketball. And then my second reaction was I was super intimidated because I was like immediately like, I don't know how I'm going to stand out. like I'm used to kind of being like the shooter, or like, you know, like people are like, all right, can he shoot? But now it's like everybody. So it was kind of interesting because I realized that was kind of the first moment I realized that I'd been around, like I've gotten accustomed to being the white guy in the room, you know. But then I realized really quickly that white people can't play basketball, and that we were a lot better than all of them. So that was kind of interesting. I'm just kidding. I'm sure there's some good white players out there.
Well, and Michael, I'm assuming, did him going to Williams have to do with this camp that you all went to? Was Williams part of this cohort of schools?
Yeah, so we were being recruited by, I guess, like a few of them, Williams being one of them. Yeah, it was at Williams, so that was definitely probably a part of it. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that was the reason that he went there, but yeah, Williams was involved with that.
Was Duncan Robinson at this camp?
No, he wasn't at that camp, but he no, because he's
a couple years older.
Younger.
Oh, he's younger. Okay.
Yeah, he's younger. I think 2 or 3 years younger. Yeah, so he came later.
Okay.
No, because he was a freshman. Michael was a senior, so he's 3 years younger. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, that guy was pretty good.
He turned out to be okay.
Worth pointing out, though, that Michael was the star on their team his senior year, not Duncan. Duncan gets a lot of credit for that
run.
Well, and not even just Michael. There were like, that team was very, very good. Duncan, I mean, he was really good. Don't get me wrong, but just you got to give the shout out to that senior class because they were really good.
Oh, trust me. Whenever I talk basketball now, I'm like, that dude on Miami went to the same school as my friend, who I'm pretty sure I beat in one-on-one at least one time.
Exactly. The transitive property of basketball.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I remember having an almost opposite experience when I started playing organized basketball in AAU, sort of towards high school, where I'm used to playing basketball with almost exclusively white people in our neighborhood or like out at the faculty club, and then start playing AAU. And I'm like, oh, like now I'm the white guy. Like now I'm the shooter. I'm, you know, like that's the role that I play on this team because everybody else on the team is black. And so it's interesting how that plays out with basketball.
And I'll say, like, I think sports, because all that subtext is there. It's not like we don't all like talk about it, you know, like, but we all are kind of aware of these dynamics that are at work, like race being one of them. But I think there are other dynamics as well. But like the sport allows us to kind of like engage with it in a very healthy way because you just beat one another. And at a certain point, you win enough and you lose enough to realize like it's going to be fine. Like we're all going to get through this. And I think like, it just is an incredible like space to like kind of deal with these things, you know? And so it's always been a nice like starting point, I think, for meaningful relationships.
Yeah. I was asked very graciously to be in a wedding later this year for my buddy Raj, and he and I met on the basketball court. We had no relationship before that and connected so well, both our personalities, but also our playing styles just gelled well enough on the court that we were always trying to be on each other's teams during pickup and complimented each other very well. And that blossomed into a really strong friendship. And I just think that the basketball has always been like that, where you're none of your like demographics matter. You're like your age, your race, your gender, like none of that stuff. It's like, can you hoop or can you not hoop?
Yeah.
And so I think that sports can be a very powerful tool for building relationships and, to your point, tackling some of those challenges within our community.
Yeah. Agreed, though. I will point out that if you weren't good at basketball, we were not very nice to you. So, so while solve some issues, there were other issues that I think might be a little more challenging for people.
Yeah, I don't know if that will ever go away when it comes to sports.
I was not trying to hoop with people who were not good. I'm gonna be honest with you.
Well, so you talked about going to this recruiting camp with your brother, and how basketball sort of transformed your perspective.
Yeah.
You didn't end up going to a D3 school.
Right.
What school did you end up going to play basketball?
Yeah, I ended up walking on at Duke. I was a walk-on at Duke for 1 year.
I think I've heard of that school before. Growing up in Durham, you hear rumors about a basketball program across the way inside the walls of East and West Campus. How did you make that decision going from, because you're a good player. You're a really good player coming out of high school, and I'm sure had opportunities to really play, at a D3 school or D2 school, or even a different D1 school. What was it about Duke that attracted you to that opportunity, even though you knew you were going to be walking on?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still kind of processing that. I think that whole experience. So again, my short answer is I don't know. But there's always been a part of me that keeps pushing myself to do things at a higher and higher level. Not for really anybody else, but for myself, because I just really feel very passionate that it's good to get good at something, because it takes a very long time to get good at something. And so I think I kind of I just had a fire inside of me. I mean, when my freshman year at Riverside, I got cut from JV and varsity. So I didn't play my freshman year in high school. And so I think I immediately realized that for me to feel satisfied with this sport, I'm going to have to just work my ass off. Because I didn't want to not play. And then I didn't want to not do really well.
Did Michael make the team?
Yeah, Michael played. Yeah. And that was definitely a hard dynamic, and something I'll get into in my book, One and Done. But yeah, definitely. And that was hard. It's like at a your twin brother, there's a lot of comparisons that are made from the outside world on that. But for me, it was always internal. I just knew I loved the game. I loved shooting. I loved playing. I loved the relationships. And, I just loved being out in the cold, firing a ball into the air and watching it go into the basket. It was just an incredible experience. And I loved getting good at that. And so I just did that as hard as I possibly could.
I know the feeling quite well.
Yeah. And so when I was looking at my options for schools, and I had gotten into Duke, the coaches had talked to me somewhat about there being an opening. And, I was sort of softly recruited. I had conversations with them, and they said, well, if you get in, they think there'll be a spot for me, but I'd have to earn it.
And your dad was working at Duke at this point?
Yeah. He's a professor in public policy there. Yeah.
And so you had some relationship with the university prior to.
Yeah, I grew up a huge Duke fan.
Yeah.
I love Duke. I was like, these guys were my idols. It was it was pretty incredible. Yeah, we were all big Duke fans. And obviously being in Durham, you can't get away from Duke. Like, come on. And you and I were like the Duke fans inside of a sea of UNC fans.
Oh yeah.
I remember like clowning people whenever Duke won, and just trying to hide our faces whenever they lost.
We did a lot more clowning than we did hiding, thankfully.
Yeah, that's because Duke's always winning, But yeah, and then so I guess I had an opportunity to play kind of like some small, like lower end D1 schools, that were kind of recruiting me, but didn't necessarily interest me because I really wanted to be somewhere very like at that point in my life, I wanted to be somewhere that was more like academic. And then so it was between a couple of D3 schools or Duke, and I just wanted to prove that I could play at that level. So I was like, all right, let's do it.
Were you already thinking about life after basketball at this point? I mean, obviously, like going to Duke with the interest of playing on the team,
yeah,
it's going to consume a good amount of your life, your time, your headspace. But also, to your point, Duke offers a world-class academic experience.
Let's not overstate that. All right. Let's be honest. I think you learn more about life from Durham Tech than from Duke, but it is what it is. All right.
No, I might agree with you there. Durham Tech is another world-class institution that I will
don't
happily
waste your
shout
money
out.
and send people to Duke, audience.
Yeah. But were you already thinking about life after basketball, even though you were about to walk onto the team?
Not really. I mean, I will say there was always a big part of my life that was very private. That was like my creativity, I guess you'd call it. I've always had this other part of me and I think basketball coincided with that quite a bit, but also was somewhat separate. I've always kind of like wrote in like manic spurts, or I had a camera in my hands and was filming things. And I think basketball for me was like a poetic thing to do. It was like very beautiful. And it was like fun to have my body pushed to certain lengths and to connect with people accordingly, both in relationships. And then when I went to Duke, like connect to a national audience. I mean, it was like suddenly, because I could run really well, I was in this incredibly strange world that had all this attention on it. I mean, I love the stat that we played on national television more times than the Lakers did the year I played. So like, there's all these spotlights on you. So,
and what year was that again? 2010, 11 or 11, 12?
2010, 11. Kyrie Irving's year.
Yeah.
We were both one and done, me and Kyrie. We started that trend. Kyrie and I started that trend.
I remember reading that. Yeah, I remember the headline.
Yep.
In
Kyrie
the
Irving
newspapers.
and David Delaney Mayer.
Yeah.
One and done. But our names are next to each other in camera, which is sick because it has both our names in the 1 year we played. So I think our both our paths to go professional following our 1 year of basketball, I think is very similar paths. But no, so to answer your question, I don't think I had any idea what the future looked like necessarily, but I was very conscious that there were parts of me that were like growing and that I needed to pay attention to, and that I didn't understand, and I was looking for things. And basketball was beginning to not satisfy that, I think, particularly once it was so professional, I think, and I wasn't playing.
Yeah.
I sat on the bench. So, which, look, for some people, they love being famous and they love the whole thing. And I just didn't care. I just wanted to play. I just love playing. So at a certain point, I think it just got too much just sitting on the bench and not really being a contributing factor here. And then, as you're alluding to, I think these other parts of me started to really take place of basketball. And I basically just started making films full time. I'd been making them somewhat kind of growing up. Like we had a home camera and I was always filming something. But really, when I left basketball, filmmaking kind of flooded in to fill that space as the craft that I was going to try to get good at. So so I don't think, to answer your question, I know I'm like talking, but to answer your question, I don't think I really thought about the future at all, but there were parts of me that I already knew I needed some figuring out to do. If that makes sense.
Did that change your relationship to basketball after that? You reach that highest point, and then once you kind of see the writing on the wall and you think, okay, I'm not going any further than this. Is it hard to come down from that high And from that point where you're now going back to the rec center and playing pickup with guys
Yeah,
who are not Kyrie Irving, who are not Nolan Smith, and just thinking like, man, this is maybe I should just stop altogether. Like maybe I can't do this anymore at all, let alone be
yeah,
on the team.
yeah. I think definitely it was hard to stop playing for sure. And I think definitely hard for any athlete. I think you go through this at some point. It's hard to just start getting worse.
Yeah.
You're just like training less and your focuses are elsewhere. So you just your body starts to change and you're just not as good. Your mind is expecting you to do one thing and your body's doing something else. So I think that was probably, that was definitely hard. And then my relationship to the game changed quite a bit. I think in part because I burned out of not playing and then of just kind of how professional everything was. Again, that seems like it works for some people, but for me, it was always this like very personal journey. And when I'd reached kind of what I felt like was my development in that regard, I, peacefully walked away from it. I mean, to answer your question about playing pickup, definitely. I mean, I've struggled to play. Even today, I don't play much because I think I pushed myself so hard, and then I got what I wanted out of it. And once I'd gotten it, the fire had left me, and it was just kind of hard to. It's almost like just being in a nostalgic daze when I play now, as opposed to like a growth. So yeah, I very much enjoyed coaching though. I started coaching a little bit in different ways, and I actually coached the club women's basketball team at Duke my senior year. Shout out to that team because we were really good. And that arguably might have been the most fun I had at Duke with basketball, just because we had so much fun. And
Do you remember what your record was?
I don't remember our record, but there are tournaments that I can remember every game of because we did well, and we didn't have like the naturally most talented team, but we beat some teams that we shouldn't have beat, and we beat them because we were just tougher than them. So it was really fun.
But
We
not
had a
because of good coaching.
no, it was a struggle learning how to coach, but they it's a really interesting thing playing that club team because we all cared a lot. It was kind of like a return to just playing for the sake of playing.
Yeah, there is something beautiful about that. I find that basketball for me has always been this safe space that allows me to distance myself from everything else in my life. You
Yeah,
can't simultaneously play basketball and, be checking your phone or like thinking about politics or whatever. It's like
yeah,
you're immersed in this very fast-paced environment.
yeah,
You're connecting with the people right in front of you, and I can imagine when it becomes about more than that. I think it's been cool in some ways to watch the Duke basketball apparatus evolve over the years, especially with social media. The Duke Blue Planet stuff is like
yeah,
very crisp, very professional. All the players doing the post game interviews with each other. Like I think there's a lot of positive things that can come from that,
yeah,
but
yeah,
also it does take away from the game in a lot of ways and
yeah,
why you play the game. And basketball it's poetic. It's almost like a choreographed dance,
yeah,
and it's like just this thing that you want to experience. And when you start to add all these other pieces to it, it dilutes it a little bit. And now the professional leagues are talking about playing in arenas with no fans during quarantine. And there's a part of me that almost wonders if the athletes would prefer that, to
right,
not have fans and to not have the music playing over the loudspeaker during
right,
timeouts and all this, and just get back to playing.
yeah, yeah. I don't know. Fans are pretty fun. It's pretty fun playing in front of a bunch of fans.
Well,
Um,
it's easy to say that when you played in Cameron Indoor Stadium.
yeah, yeah. It's pretty magical. Um, but I do think like it's just a question of like what do you want to get out of it, and what do you want to get out of you know what you're doing. I think if you're interested in being a professional athlete, you're going to become a professional.
Right.
I mean, if that's your goal, then you're willing to give up certain things about why you do it, that you're just going to have to do that. I mean, you're just going to have to give up certain things to become a professional. But I think I just wasn't at all interested in being professional at basketball. I think it was always a personal journey, and I didn't want someone else to dictate that for me. And so I think it just ran its course for what I was getting out of it. In the middle of the night, it's 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 in the middle of the night, it's.
And so how does that transition into filmmaking? What were you interested in coming out of that Duke basketball experience and not picking up a camera for the first time, but maybe thinking about filmmaking as a full-time craft?
Yeah.
What stories or what things were you interested in exploring with your camera in the headspace that you were in at that point?
Yeah. I think I've always felt like we're all running around and we have no idea what's going on. And I think I've always felt like there's some sort of mysterious lie or truth that I'm trying to seek out. Because when I add things up, and I think this kind of goes back to my experience in Durham, there's so many things that I do not understand about why people do things, about how the world works. And I think my experience at Duke was very much a conquering of one craft, and then a kind of like falling out of love with it, and realizing that there were other ways to engage with the world that were going to give me a more meaningful experience, or whatever the way to say that is. So, and I just started reading a ton. Like I started reading everything I could get my hands on, and documentaries kind of like came in, because documentaries are a weird thing. Like people think they're true. You bring people into an audience, and you're engaging with truth, which is a very, very, very weird phenomenon. And
do you think that documentaries are not true, or you just think that
yes.
telling the truth is something that people are not used to experiencing?
Well, I think they're not true, is the short answer. I mean, I think the way I like to think about it is like writing has been around for like thousands and thousands of, I don't know the history of writing. They started writing because we were trading goods, and they started making symbols, and then writing emerged. And so there's like a long history of writing. Filmmaking has been around for like 100 years. And inside of that, the techniques that people call documentary have been around for like 50 years, maybe a little longer. I'm not a historian. So it's a very young art form, like documentary filmmaking. It's a very young art form. And we rely on techniques from fiction filmmaking, which is good, I think. It's not a bad thing. But people kind of expect you to be telling the truth in a documentary, which in and of itself, I think is almost an impossible task, because like we did journalism together in high school, mm-hmm. and you had to write the lead to start, it's like who, what, when, where, why. And like we were coached to try not to use too many, adjectives, or too many like,
Coach might be too soft a word. I think we were berated into doing those things.
Shout out to Steve Unruh. Exactly. So, but all right. But then the second you play music and you have a beautiful image, like you're conjuring a history of techniques and of agreements made between audience and creator that is based in fiction and designed to appeal to the emotion. And so you're out of journalism immediately. And I was fascinated by what was happening when I was creating things and engaging with people, and they would watch stuff and I would show them things. And I just found the that basic premise very, very, very interesting. And so I started kind of just diving into it. And at that point in my life, I discovered another wildly transformative thing in my life, which was I read the diary that my grandfather, who I never met at this point in my life, wrote during the Holocaust, growing up as a half Jew in Frankfurt, Germany. So here I am, this like ex-Duke basketball player who grew up in Watts Hospital in Durham, North Carolina, you know, reading a diary that was written, you know, halfway around the world in Nazi Germany. And it was my grandfather, my dad's dad. And so I was kind of hit with like, again, another situation where it's like, there's this community out there that I'm apparently a part of that is really, really confusing and really violent. And my family kind of inherited that, you know? And so I immediately sort of started making a documentary about my family's history in Germany. And I learned German and I went to Germany and I freaking interviewed hundreds of people and tried to make sense of this kind of confusing situation that happened both with my grandfather and then more of the historical context that surrounds it. So yeah, I think documentaries just became a way to try to make sense of things. Though I don't know how much help that's been for me personally. I think probably I'm just more confused now than ever.
Well, what's interesting about documentary or just documentation over the course of human history is that it's not done in a vacuum.
Yeah.
Historians are individuals with their own experiences. And so
Right.
to your point, we look at history and then we look at documentary and we think, okay, this is the truth.
Yeah.
100% versus this is like, these are facts that are being presented by a particular person and their perspective on what's important and what isn't.
Yeah.
And so even in documentary, I mean, that's why, you know, a lot of times you'll see a particular story told now through like a fictional series, a documentary series, a podcast series, a movie, you know, all these different platforms, because there are so many different versions of the same facts that you can use to present a story. And when you layer tone and music and, you know, all these other elements, to your point of like fiction filmmaking into it, it twists and turns in a way that is not pure. And I don't know that that's bad, but it is something to recognize in documentary.
Well, I'll put it this way. I think there's no purity in creating things. So I think that idea that we could possibly get to a pure state is a fallacy and one that should be stamped out whenever we talk about creating things. I also just think, for me, there should be more dialogue around techniques. Specifically, how are we doing this? And not even from an ethical perspective, in my opinion. I mean, there's a sort of an ethical argument and an artistic argument, and they're very separate. I just want people to think more about techniques in documentaries, because I think it's an incredible art form. And the techniques that we're using, people it doesn't seem to be in the popular sphere. Like if you watched a fiction movie, if you went to see Avengers, all right, you might say, look, I loved these qualities about it, and we would sort of break it down and whatever. But documentaries, for some reason, seem to like get away with not having that level of filmmaking scrutiny, I guess you call it. But I just think there's a lot of techniques that I would love for audiences to kind of like talk about more. And because then you start seeing that the Tiger King is a very different beast than what you think it is, if we break it down in terms of its techniques. And when you compare it to, other types of documentaries, like, I don't know, I don't really watch that many documentaries that are like popular. So I'm trying to think of a popular reference. But anyways, yeah, I think you start to see that, that there are kind of like,
Well,
I
let me
think
ask you
people can
this.
engage with it differently, which is kind of a lot of what I'm trying to do, I think. Yeah.
What are some documentaries that you have seen where you feel
Oh
like
Lord.
exemplify the technique that
Yeah.
you want other people to absorb?
So I'll preface this by saying I don't watch that many documentaries. I
You're
read
working on quite a few.
I read old fiction, and I watch old movies. But so how to answer that? I think, well, I mean, I could rattle off a bunch, but I don't know how
Well,
many
even if
people have
there's
seen
not a
it.
particular movie, is there a particular technique that stands out to you as something that people should be,
Yeah.
one, looking out for, and other documentary filmmakers should be introducing more into their work?
Yeah, I think one kind of overarching thing is that I think documentaries tend to be valued by their ability to convey information, which starts to sound a lot like what gossip is. So I think what happens a lot with documentaries is that people talk about them as information, but they're not talked about as crafts or as pieces or as films or whatever. Which again, I don't. It's fine, except that I think what happens is the pressures on creators starts to be that we have to find the hook. If I hear another person say to me, "You need to raise the stakes," I'm gonna scream, because life is very complicated and life is very, very nuanced, and our experiences in day-to-day life are incredibly small and incredibly quiet. You don't talk most of the time. It's a very quiet existence. And there should be a film art form that engages with that. And it should be documentaries, because this is where we're talking about truth. Like, this is where we're talking about life. So I think I wish there was more space for films that did not engage with ideas, and that instead engaged with more immediate truths, more poetic moments, more like subtle realities. I think fiction movies do that. There is space for that, but I think documentary has some catching up to do with that, if that makes sense. Um, and like one really great example of kind of this experience, I think, is like, if you if you go try to make a documentary and go try to raise any money, I guarantee you immediately the like second question will be, why does this matter to the world? And you're asked to write a sweeping historical context about why this story is matters and why it is going to change things and why it, all that stuff. You can't say, well, it's a good story about a woman trying to, do this. Like that doesn't mean, like,
It can't
I don't
sound
know.
ordinary,
Yeah,
even
exactly.
though there are many extraordinary things in what we consider ordinary.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So, um, so I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if that answered it, but
Well, so let me ask you about your own work. So you have
goodness.
like
Yeah.
a production company now. You
Yep.
and our dear friend Matt Brondoli
Hmm.
work on a lot of films together.
Hmm.
And so, how are you thinking about these things as you're uh, producing your own work? You've got
Yeah.
a couple things that are being released soon.
Yeah.
Senior Night being one of them, which
Hmm.
is a great short film uh, about our alma mater, Riverside, and sort of the journey for the journey that one takes in that moment,
Yep.
uh, as a senior,
Yeah.
going through that experience. For anyone
Yeah.
that's played sports, Senior Night is like um, the seminal moment in their playing career, especially for people that aren't playing college sports. Senior Night is like that's it
Yeah.
pretty much. So you've got that coming out, and then you've
Yeah.
got the project Dream Across America,
Yep.
which I'm super excited about. I think is a really cool project.
Yep.
So maybe talk a little bit about those, and then how you're trying to approach them with these different documentary philosophies in mind.
Yeah. So I think it's probably worth saying, I hope I don't come across as too academic, because I try not to think about things like I don't think about things in their intellectual and historical context until like way after the fact. It's a very personal thing for me to create these projects, because I think documentary has just always been so like, it's just like the way that I can stay sane and not like lose my mind. And like I talk about this a lot, and we alluded to it a little bit earlier, but I also think just having a twin brother has been a very, very big influence in why I make documentaries, because I think like growing up with another human being, I mean, I entered the world with another person, which is like already just a really strange experience. And then all of my memories are with him, and we like loved each other and love each other more deeply than, like, I relate to mothers on this, because it's like there's no question that I would do anything for him and he would do that for me. And so I have experienced life feeling totally in a relationship that is, without any shadow of a doubt, unconditional. And so relationships for me are like very, very, like I'm comfortable in intimacy. And so the documentary is like a way to engage with those issues. And particularly since Michael in my life is kind of like, I mean, we just live our own lives, you know, we have different things that we do, and we don't see each other every day. We live in different places. So I think documentary has kind of like stepped in as like me finding meaning in a relationship, you know? And so I've always loved to just listen to people and to like, to find nuances about them that are meaningful, and to like encourage them to open up and to like make something out of that. And it's not always pretty. And I've made every mistake that one can make in the process. But I think, so with our projects, I mean, I could talk about each of them individually. Yeah.
I think they both reflect that idea of intimacy as well. I
Yeah.
think Senior Night and Dream Across America, they're both, you know, you're zooming in on particular subjects
Yeah.
and exploring
Yeah.
these, you know, their lives and what's meaningful to them and
Yeah.
how they deal with it on a very emotional
Yeah.
level.
Yeah, and part of that, I think, just from a technique point of view, I think part of that is just setting limitations from a story point of view that, in my opinion, are somewhat radical in documentary. Like Senior Night really is just an experiment. It was designed as an experiment. I wanted to try to make a movie that gave you absolutely no information about these people, and all you get is what they're thinking in the moment. And so it's very much like in a conversation with other documentaries, that perhaps their first 5 minutes would give you Anthony's backstory, and then the next 5 minutes would show you why this game is important, and then the next 5 minutes would, you know, interview people in the barbershop and be like, oh, this is an important game, it's Senior Night, you know, like that might be one way to do it, which is fine. But I just wanted to do something different that wasn't dealing with information, and instead was dealing with other rules and other types of dramatic devices. And so Senior Night is that. And I think one of the reasons I love doing that is what happens is the subject becomes the dramatic device. Like, it's very intimate. Like, you can't get out of Anthony's head. You're in his head trying to imagine who he is at every step of the way, because that's what moves the story forward. I'm not leaning on why the game's important to move it forward. I'm leaning on Anthony's tired, he has a lot of adrenaline, and he's worried he's going to miss a free throw. So what's going to happen? like that is the dramatic device. So, which is very unusual for documentary, but not unusual for fiction movie. So I think Senior Night was that. And then with Dream Across America, which is a project that like a close friend of mine and I started, and I could go on and on about the conversations him and I have had about this concept of immigration and immigrants. His family is Egyptian. His parents came over, and a really inspiring story about his mother and father have kind of made a life in America. And then, like I mentioned earlier, my grandfather was a half Jewish immigrant who came over after the Holocaust, after losing his father, and who died in Auschwitz. And then he came to America and rebuilt. I think the idea of an immigrant is that perhaps there's no bigger idea where the contexts and ideas are imposed upon the immigrant as opposed to just people being themselves. So we're very much trying to tell stories that center on the entrepreneur, on the subject, on the immigrant who we're talking with. And that was something that was very personal to Andrew and I, whose families are not what you hear of when you think of the concept immigrant. Like, there's all kinds of different experiences, all kinds of different stories, and there's no like one thing, So I think it was a surprising fit with Andrew and I to create this project. So that project is going to be a series, and we're still figuring out where it will end up, but a very exciting project. We have tons of momentum and tons of cool partners on it. So exciting time.
And so where can people find your work if they want to continue to track the stuff that you're working on?
Yeah, I've been really hesitant to be on social media, in part because I'm very suspicious of techniques used in social media. And it's just not natural for me to be on it. So, but we have a website, daviddelaneymayer.com, and on there you'll see projects, and anything that does happen, we post to that. And
you have a newsletter that people can sign up for?
Yeah, we do. We also have a way to support our work. We have our own private Patreon set up. I can't promise tons of content will come through it, but but you'll be the first to hear about it if something does come. So that's mostly how. I mean, I have an Instagram that I use somewhat frequently, that people can check on, and then I try to write articles. I don't even submit them places. I just post them to Medium. In fact, this has become our whole philosophy. We don't submit things anywhere. We've decided to stop submitting to film festivals. Because I'm just kind of tired of people telling me what's good and what isn't. And I think that experience for creatives is an impossible experience when people are just constantly telling you like, hey, sorry, we like have so many entrances, like we have so many applicants, and we love your work, but you're just not accepted, and it's like some weird like film festival or something. Like, I don't even think we've submitted that many times in the past, but I know in talking to people, it's like a very frustrating experience. So I've just kind of decided we're going to stop submitting because there are tons of ways to reach audiences that don't require these like strange, like not based in the South institutions that somehow have a claim on what's good and what's not, that are based in like very poorly thought out and very poorly designed systems. And so that's one of the reasons I've loved public television. And so I think we're going to try to keep building relationships with public television as an outlet for our work, because their mission is very much in line with a lot of stuff we want to do, which is just like reaching people with honest storytelling. So anyways, but that's kind of a tangent. So, but yeah, the website is where people can check on our stuff.
We'll make sure to point people in that direction when we post the podcast. But I just have to say this has been a tremendous experience and a great thing. This is my first time doing a Zoom podcast, so I'm excited to see how this turns out and get it up on the web for everyone to listen to. And it's been an honor to catch up with you. I feel like we've crossed paths many times, sort of like two ships in the night over the last few years, but haven't really had a chance to catch up recently. So this has been awesome for that, if nothing else.
Agreed. I'm honored to be on it. Like I said, I told you before, but I generally say no when people ask to interview me because, well, one, it scares the hell out of me, but two, I don't necessarily trust what they're gonna do with it. But I of course said yes to you because it's totally great to catch up, and I love all that you're doing. So
well, I appreciate that, and I'll make sure to manipulate the hell out of everything you've said so that it sounds like total junk.
I would expect nothing less. Hey, I do the same thing,
All right, man. Stay safe. Enjoy your time out in Salisbury, and look forward to more of your work as it comes out. And say hi to the folks and your brothers for me as well.
Yep.
And I'll talk to you again soon, man.
Definitely, man. It's been a pleasure.